Elliot adjusted his tie, his hands trembling as he stood before the mirror in their bedroom. The faint aroma of lavender lingered in the air, a reminder of the scented candles Lena loved to burn in the evenings. Today marked their 12th anniversary, but the warmth that once filled their home seemed like a distant memory. "Are you going to stand there all day, or help me with the groceries?" Lena's voice, sharp and unyielding, echoed from the kitchen. Elliot sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Coming," he replied, shoving aside the wistful thoughts. Their relationship hadn't always been this way. 12 years ago they had exchanged vows under a canopy of spring blossoms, surrounded by friends and family. Back then, Lena's laughter was a melody he couldn't resist, and her fiery personality felt like a spark of adventure in his otherwise methodical life. But somewhere along the way, the spark had turned into a flame that often burned him. "Finally," Lena muttered as Elliot entered the kitchen. She was unpacking bags with precise, almost aggressive movements. "Do you think these things carry themselves?" He bit his tongue and reached for a bag. "How was your day?" She rolled her eyes. "Busy, like always. Unlike you, I actually have a demanding job. I don't have the luxury of sitting at a desk all day, doodling on paper." The jab stung, but Elliot chose not to react. He loved his work as a graphic designer, even if Lena saw it as frivolous. Over the years, her words had chipped away at his confidence, yet he clung to his love for her, convinced that if he tried hard enough, things would return to how they once were. "Did you make a reservation for tonight?" she asked without looking at him. "Yes, 7 o'clock at La Belle Maison." Lena snorted. "That pretentious place? Couldn't you pick somewhere more relaxed?" "I thought you liked it there," Elliot said softly, unsure if he'd misunderstood her preferences yet again. "I did. 5 years ago." She sighed, waving him off. "Whatever. Let's just get through dinner without you embarrassing me." Elliot forced a smile. "Of course." Dinner was a quiet affair. La Belle Maison was as elegant as Elliot remembered, but the romantic atmosphere felt heavy, oppressive even, under Lena's cold demeanor. She picked at her plate, her eyes wandering around the room as if searching for something or someone more interesting. "Everything okay?" Elliot ventured, his voice tentative. "Fine," she replied curtly, not meeting his gaze. He knew better than to press further. Instead, he focused on his food, though the lump in his throat made swallowing difficult. When dessert arrived, Lena excused herself to take a call. Elliot watched her leave, his heart sinking as she walked out of sight. Her phone conversations had become increasingly frequent and secretive, and though he hated himself for it, he couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion that something was wrong. As she returned, her face brightened briefly, until she saw him looking. The fleeting smile disappeared, replaced by her usual indifference. The pauvre merchants started counting out money and took their places at one of the tables. Their house was quiet when they returned, the silence punctuated only by the soft hum of the refrigerator. Lena retreated to the bedroom without a word, leaving Elliot alone in the living room. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Memories of their early years together flooded his mind. The nights they stayed up talking until dawn, the way she used to run her fingers through his hair. Her laughter, ringing out like a bell. Where had it all gone? He reached for his sketch pad, hoping to lose himself in his art, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Instead, he flipped through the pages, each one filled with drawings of Lena. Her smile, her eyes, her silhouette, all captured in moments of love and admiration. Tears blurred his vision. He wanted to fix things, to remind her of the man he once was and the woman she used to be. But how could he fight for someone who seemed to have stopped fighting for him? The first real crack appeared one Saturday morning. Lena had left early, claiming she had errands to run. As Elliot tidied up the bedroom, he noticed a faint but unfamiliar scent on her pillow. It was floral, sweet, and nothing like the lavender she usually wore. His chest tightened. Later that evening, as she came home, he couldn't stop himself. "Ah, did you buy a new perfume?" Lena's eyes narrowed. "Why? Do you not like it?" I just noticed it was different." He shrugged, brushing past him. "I thought you liked it when I tried new things." Elliot dropped the subject, but the unease stayed with him. The weeks that followed were a blur of tension and unanswered questions. Lena grew more distant, her excuses for late nights and weekend outings becoming increasingly flimsy. Elliot found himself second-guessing everything, her words, her smiles, even her touch, which had grown cold and infrequent. One day, while doing laundry, he found a receipt in her coat pocket. It was for a boutique hotel downtown, dated the same day she had claimed to be at work. And as his hands shook as he stared at the slip of paper, the truth he had been avoiding finally staring back at him, Elliot sat at the kitchen table, the hotel receipt trembling in his hands. His mind raced, 1,000 thoughts and memories crashing together in a chaotic swirl. How long had this been going on? Who was the other man? He looked at the clock. 7:30 p.m. Lena was late again. She'd texted earlier, claiming she had a last-minute meeting, but after discovering the receipt, Elliot no longer believed her excuses. Oof. The front door creaked open. He heard her heels click against the hardwood floor and the rustle of her purse as she dropped it on the entryway table. "Hey!" she called out, her tone casual, as if everything were fine. "Lena!" Elliot said, his voice strained. She paused, sensing the tension in the air. "What's wrong?" Elliot placed the receipt on the table, sliding it toward her without a word. Her eyes flicked to the slip of paper, her expression carefully neutral. "Where did you find that?" "In your coat pocket," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. She crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. "So now you're going through my things?" Elliot's hands clenched into fists. "Don't turn this around on me. Just tell me the truth, Dana. Who is it?" She rolled her eyes, her composure cracking. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it to me," he shouted, his voice raw with pain. "Explain why you've been lying to me. Why you've been spending nights at a hotel instead of coming home." Lena's eyes flashed with anger. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me," he said, his voice breaking. She hesitated, her gaze darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Finally she sighed. It's not serious, okay? It's just an escape. I needed something different." "Something different?" Elliot repeated, his voice trembling. After everything we've been through, after everything I've given you, you needed something different?" "You don't get it, Elliot," she snapped. "You're always there, always trying so hard, and it's suffocating. I needed space." Something that wasn't tied to this perfect little world you've built for us. Elliot stared at her, the weight of her words crushing him. "I thought you loved me," he whispered. Her face softened for a moment, but then she looked away. I do, in my own way. But maybe that's not enough anymore." The days that followed were a blur of silence and avoidance. Lena spent more time out of the house, her excuses becoming thinner and more transparent. Elliot withdrew into himself, throwing his energy into his work to numb the pain. One evening, as Lena was leaving, Elliot finally mustered the courage to ask, "Are you even coming back tonight?" She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. "I don't know," she said quietly, not looking at him. Then she walked out, leaving Elliot alone in the empty house. Elliot found solace in unexpected places. His co-worker Hannah noticed his distant demeanor and invited him out for coffee one afternoon. "You don't look okay," she said gently, her warm brown eyes filled with concern. Elliot hesitated, unsure how much to share, but as the words tumbled out of him he realized how much he needed someone to listen. Hannah didn't judge or offer empty platitudes. She simply listened, nodding occasionally and offering a kind smile. "Sometimes," she said after he finished, "we lose ourselves trying to hold on to something that's already gone. Maybe it's time to figure out who you are without her." Elliot began to rebuild his life piece by piece. He started attending a local art class, rediscovering the passion that had first drawn him to graphic design. He spent more time with friends who rallied around him with unwavering support. But no matter how much he tried to move forward, the weight of Lena's betrayal lingered. He still loved her despite everything, and the thought of letting go felt like tearing out a piece of his soul. The opportunity to confront the truth came unexpectedly. While running errands downtown, Elliot spotted Lena walking arm in arm with a man he didn't recognize. They were laughing, their body language intimate. Elliot's blood boiled, but instead of storming up to them, he followed at a distance. They entered a cafe, taking a seat by the window. Summoning his courage, Elliot walked inside and approached their table. "Lena," he said, his voice calm but firm. Her eyes widened in shock. "Elliot, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," he replied, his gaze flicking to the man beside her. He ranked the oldest person in the world. He was the grandest person to her. The man, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. "I didn't know she was married," he said, standing. "Of course you didn't," Elliot said bitterly. "She's good at keeping secrets." Lena glared at him. "You had no right to follow me." "Lena, I had every right," he shot back. "You're my wife, or at least you were." The man quickly excused himself, leaving Elliot and Lena alone at the table. "This is over, Lena," Elliot said, his voice trembling. "I can't do this anymore." Elliot filed for divorce the following week. The process was painful, every step feeling like a betrayal of the love he still felt for her. Lena didn't fight him. If anything, she seemed relieved. The house they had shared for so many years now felt like a prison, filled with memories that haunted Elliot at every turn. He began packing his things, preparing to move into a small apartment across town. On the night before he moved out, Elliot found a letter on the kitchen counter. It was from Lena. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know that none of this was your fault. You loved me in a way I didn't deserve, and I let my own selfishness destroy us. I hope you find someone who sees you for the amazing person you are." Tears blurred Elliot's vision as he finished reading. Despite everything, a part of him still loved her, and the loss of their shared dreams left a hollow ache in his chest. Elliot stood in the center of the nearly empty house, the hollow echo of his footsteps amplifying the silence around him. Boxes were stacked neatly by the door, each one labeled with meticulous care. Books, art supplies, kitchenware. Yet no amount of organization could bring order to the chaos in his heart. The letter from Lena sat on the counter where he had left it the night before, its words etched into his mind like a scar. He hadn't slept. How could he, when everything he thought he knew about his life had been turned to ash? He picked up the letter again, as if rereading it might change the meaning. Her words were apologetic, even remorseful, but they didn't soothe the raw wound she had left behind. They only deepened it. "You loved me in a way I didn't deserve." Then why wasn't it enough? Elliot whispered to the empty room, his voice cracking. The house had been their sanctuary once, a place where they dreamed of their future together. He remembered painting the walls of the living room with Lena, her hair streaked with white paint after a playful brush fight. They had laughed so much that day, their joy spilling over into every corner of the space. Now the same walls felt oppressive, their emptiness a stark reminder of what he had lost. The apartment Elliot moved into was modest, its beige walls and worn carpet a far cry from the home he had shared with Lena. But it was his. He spent the first few days unpacking, trying to fill the void with tasks that required no emotional investment. Every box he opened felt like unearthing a time capsule from a life that no longer existed. He found their wedding album tucked away in a box labeled Memories. Elliot sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through the pages. There they were, frozen in time. Lena's radiant smile as she walked down the aisle, his own face glowing with pure, unfiltered joy. He traced her image with his finger, his chest tightening. "I don't even know you anymore," he said softly, closing the album and setting it aside. 3 weeks passed before Elliot heard from Lena again. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, the kind of night that made the world feel small and grey. He was sitting at his kitchen table, sketching absent-mindedly, when his phone buzzed. The name on the screen made his stomach twist. Lena. He hesitated before answering. "Hello?" "Hi, Elliot." Her voice was cautious, almost timid, a stark contrast to the sharp tone he had grown used to. "What do you need, Lena?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. I just wanted to see how you're doing." Elliot laughed bitterly. "How I'm doing? You don't get to ask me that, Lena, not after everything." "I know," she said quickly. "I know I don't have the right. But I've been thinking about you. About us." "Us?" The word felt foreign on his tongue. "There is no us anymore. You made sure of that." "I never stopped caring about you," she said, her voice breaking. Elliot closed his eyes, gripping the phone tightly. "Then why did you destroy everything we built?" The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Lena whispered, "Because I was afraid." "Of what?" he demanded. "Of not being enough, of being trapped in a life where I couldn't breathe." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had loved her so completely, so selflessly, and yet it had suffocated her. "I never wanted to trap you," he said quietly. "I just wanted to build a life with you, a life where we could be happy." "I know," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I ruined it. I ruined us. I'm so sorry." "Elliot?" He didn't respond. He couldn't. The next day at work, Elliot's co-worker Hannah approached him with a hesitant smile. "You look like you could use a distraction," she said, holding out a flyer. "Oh, it was an invitation to an art showcase at a local gallery." Elliot glanced at the flyer, then back at Hannah. "Thanks, but I'm not really in the mood for crowds." "Come on," she urged. "You love art, and it's been ages since you did anything for yourself. You can't keep hiding away, Elliot." He sighed, knowing she was right. "Fine, but only if you promise not to ditch me there." "Deal," she said, grinning. The gallery was a bustling hub of creativity and life. Paintings, sculptures, and installations filled the space, each piece telling its own story. For the first time in weeks, Elliot felt a flicker of inspiration. Hannah stayed by his side, pointing out pieces that caught her eye and encouraging him to share his thoughts. He found himself smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time in what felt like forever. As they moved through the exhibits, Elliot's gaze fell on a painting that stopped him in his tracks. It was a swirling mix of colors, chaotic yet beautiful, evoking a sense of both destruction and renewal. "That's how I feel," he murmured. Hannah followed his gaze. "Maybe that's a good thing," she said. "Destruction makes way for creation." Elliot and Hannah grew closer in the weeks that followed. Her kindness and quiet strength were a balm to his wounded heart. One evening, as they sat on a park bench watching the sunset, Hannah turned to him. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" Elion considered the question, the weight of it pressing on him. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think I need to try, for my own sake, if nothing else." "Finds later," Elliot agreed to meet Mina for coffee. She looked different, softer, almost fragile. "I wanted to thank you," she said, stirring her drink, "for meeting me, for giving me a chance to say goodbye properly." Elliot nodded. "I think we both needed this." They talked for hours, reminiscing about the good times and acknowledging their failures. By the time they parted ways, Elliot felt lighter, as if he had finally let go of the weight he had been carrying. Elliot sat in his dimly lit studio, the soft hum of his favorite classical music filling the air. His brushes lay untouched beside him, the canvas in front of him still blank. He had tried to paint, to pour his emotions into his art, as he always did, but nothing came. His heart felt heavy, weighed down by the memories of Lena. It had been 6 months since their last meeting at the cafe. She had promised to change, to prove she was worthy of his love. But Elliot couldn't bring himself to let her back in. God, how he wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to believe the loss of the people of his life. But the pain of her betrayal lingered, a constant reminder of what they had lost. Late that evening, as he sat staring at the canvas, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Lena. "Elliot, I need to see you, please." His first instinct was to ignore it, but something in the message felt urgent. Against his better judgment, he replied, "Where?" They met at the park. where they had shared so many happy moments in the early years of their marriage. Lena was sitting on a bench under the oak tree where he had once proposed to her. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with red. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said softly as he approached. "I almost didn't," he admitted, standing a few feet away. Lena's hands trembled as she clutched a folded piece of paper. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I've accepted that. But I need you to know how much I loved you, how much I still do." Elliot's chest tightened. "Lena, if you loved me, why did you destroy us?" Tears streamed down her face. "Because I was selfish. Because I was scared of how much you loved me when I didn't even love myself. And by the time I realized what I had done, it was too late." He sat down beside her, his heart aching for the woman he had once adored. Why did you ask me here?" Lena handed him the folded paper. "I needed you to read this." Elliot hesitated before unfolding the note. It was a letter, raw, heartfelt, and filled with regrets. In it, Lena apologized for everything, for her cruelty, her betrayal, and for the pain she had caused. Elliot hesitated before unfolding the note. It was a letter, cruel, heartfelt, and filled with black and silver letters. The final lines hit him like a blow to the chest. "I can't live with the choices I've made, and I can't keep hurting you by staying in your life. This is my goodbye." Elliot looked up, panic setting in. "Lena, what is this?" She stood, her face calm but resolute. "I wanted you to know how sorry I am before I go." "No," he said, rising to his feet. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to leave me like this again." "It's better this way," she whispered, stepping back. "You deserve a chance to be happy, Elliot, and I've already taken too much from you." Before he could stop her, she turned and walked away, her figure disappearing into the night. A week later, Elliot received the news. Lena's body had been found at the base of a cliff near the coastline, a place they had visited often in their happier days. Her death was ruled a suicide. Elliot was inconsolable. Guilt and grief consumed him, the weight of her loss pressing down on him like a crushing wave. He replayed their last conversation over and over in his mind, searching for the words that might have saved her. He poured his anguish into his art, painting furiously in the weeks that followed. The studio became his sanctuary, the only place where he could confront his emotions without fear of judgment. One evening, he completed a piece that left him breathless. It was a portrait of Lena, not the woman she became in their final years, but the vibrant, loving woman he had fallen in love with. Her smile, her eyes, the way she used to look at him, all of it was captured in vivid detail. He titled the painting "The Love That Endures." Elliot hung it in his studio, a constant reminder of both the joy and the pain she had brought into his life. And though he never stopped loving her, he learned to live with the loss, carrying her memory with him as he rebuilt the pieces of his shattered heart. The canvas beside it remained blank, waiting for the day Elliot would find the strength to create again.